Today at the National Press Club, founder and CEO of Prokect herself, Tahlia Isaac. In the lead-up to International Women's Day, she'll discuss how supporting incarcerated women in Australia can reduce crime and create safer communities. Tahlia Isaac with today's National Press Club address.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's National Press Club Westpac address. My name is Emma MacDonald. I'm the Associate Editor of Her Canberra and the Canberra Convener of Women in Media. Today's address is a special International Women's Day address in partnership with Women in Media and the Press Club, and we are honoured to present Tahlia Isaac. Tahlia brings a unique perspective to the very current debate about Australia's approach to crime. She has been in prison and holds a postgraduate degree in criminology. Her not-for-profit project, Herself, helps women rebuild after incarceration. Tahlia's speech is entitled Australia's Broken Social Contract, How Supporting Incarcerated Women Can Reduce Crime and Create Safer Communities. If you would like to join the conversation online, you can use the handle Press Club Aust or the hashtag MPC. And also, did you know the National Press Club now has a podcast, and you can access this speech and other podcasts from the National Press Club on their website. Can you now welcome Tahlia Isaac?
I want to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you to Emma MacDonald, Women in Media and the National Press Club for bestowing upon me this incredible honour. And I want to especially thank and acknowledge the women who work on the front lines every day, who have lived experience. I want to start by telling you about the day I was released from prison for the last time. In 2019, I was transferred from the Brisbane Women's Correctional Centre to a holding cell below the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane. It was early morning, around 4 a.m, and I was handcuffed in the back of a van, confined in a cage just big enough for one person. I was taken to the Supreme Court without prior warning. I had been woken by a loudspeaker in my cell, told I had to attend court. I protested, believing it to be a mistake, but I was informed that if I did not get up and get dressed, someone would come to assist me. So I complied, leaving behind a room that I would never see again, which had become my home, with no opportunity to prepare for the day and weeks that lay ahead. During my time in prison, I had the chance to work with a counsellor from an outside service. This is an opportunity not afforded to everyone. Each week, we sat together as I expressed my pain and self-hatred, and she held space for me, recognising my humanity despite my past. And yet, as I stood before that judge, my hands shaking and my heart racing, his words stripped me of my worth, reminiscent of the violence that I had endured at the hands of men who sought to harm me in the years before. He sentenced me to 2 years in prison with release on immediate parole for time served. After being shuffled out of the courtroom, I was handcuffed again and taken back to the cells, waiting for the paperwork to be processed for my release. As I stood close to the door to have my cuffs removed, my rubber thong got stuck, and as I pulled my hands and body away from the door, my shoe broke, leaving me in socks, track pants and a t-shirt as it neared 7:30 p.m. on a Friday night in Brisbane. The Watchhouse staff handed me a piece of paper with my mugshot, my details and a highlighted section stating I was released from court with immediate effect. As they opened the door and told me I was free to go, I was faced with a choice. Turn left and jump a train in socks and head back to the Gold Coast and the destructive life I had known, or turn right into the arms of my waiting mother who had received a call from my lawyer and been there to support me. Turning right wasn't an easy choice to make. I was 29 at this point in my life. All I had ever known was the life I had before prison. I had to rebuild everything from nothing, starting with my own sense of self. I want to acknowledge the privilege that I had in choosing to turn right and finding a safe space to land after being tangled in a web of chaos and destruction with no identity, confidence, money or resources. And that's how I find myself on this stage before you today. Not least of all due to the steadfast love of my mother, who can bring any plant back to life because she refuses to quit. and my father, who is a measured provider, always wanting the best for his kids. I stand here today for International Women's Day, a day to celebrate and to drive the continued advancement of the rights of women and girls across the world. We have come so far. And yet the issue of women's incarceration is often forgotten. Prison is not some place over there where bad people go. The ripple effect on our communities from ignoring women's incarceration is wide-reaching and it impacts us all. By standing on this stage, I represent the silenced women who are often forgotten in conversations about feminism. I represent a part of society that we overlook as contributing to communities. I do not represent every woman who has been incarcerated. Our personal experiences are complex and our pathways into prison are different, but what we are connected by is what prison does to a person, how it reshapes our sense of identity and belonging, our dreams and our potential. There are many faces of incarceration, different histories, different risk factors, but what we all share is what it feels like when society breaks its contract with us. Almost half of women who exit prison will exit into homelessness. Released in the same way I was, but without prior warning, but often unlike me, because they have no safe place to return to. Women will exit back into the violence they entered prison from or straight onto the streets. Having nowhere safe to live is a key factor contributing to the rising reoffending or recidivism rate, which is a term we use to place blame on individual choices when circumstances and broken social contracts dictate their reality. Australia currently operates 114 custodial correctional facilities across 9 separate legal systems, one for each state and territory and one for the Commonwealth. 9 systems. It costs our community $7 billion a year. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, from June 30, 24 to June 30, 25, the number of female prisoners increased by 12%, reaching a total of 3,831 women in prison. This translates to an incarceration rate of 35 per 100,000 adult females, up from 32 the previous year. Perhaps the most shameful example of the broken social contract is the way this country continues to lock up and marginalise the custodians of this land. Almost 1 in 2 people in prison, 45%, are First Nations people, despite First Nations adults making up 3.8% of the general population. In July 2020, the National Agreement on Closing the Gap set Target 10 to reduce the rate of First Nations adult incarceration by at least 15% by 2031. We are not on track to achieve that. We are going in the wrong direction. Between 2019 and 2024, the age standardised rate of imprisonment among First Nations adults increased by 21%. While it is important to acknowledge that men make up the majority of the prison population, the rate of female incarceration is rising at a much faster pace. Particularly alarming is the rate of incarceration for Indigenous women. First Nations women are up to 22 times more likely to be incarcerated than non-Indigenous women. But it is not until you can see that with your own eyes that you understand what that means. I have been in prisons where entire units are made up of black women from the same remote community who don't speak English as a first language. These women live by law, not L-A-W, but L-O-R-E. They live on country, they live in community, and they live by old ways. Until they are sent to prison, and with generations of the same family, they sit in cells side by side. While elders work tirelessly to hold mob together, the destruction of land, dispossession and disenfranchisement makes efforts seem futile. The social contract shows itself as broken here too. Small First Nations communities should be allowed to self-determine how they live their lives, but the systems forced upon them have taken all agency away. Forced to work for the welfare they need to buy the groceries that are triple the price than in cities because local food has become a commodity rather than a naturally occurring source of sustenance. The social contract here almost doesn't exist, and yet punishment for not complying is harsh. I want to take you back to 2016, 8 years into a daily ice addiction that led me to prison. I had been through 3 relationships where I had no power, no control, and attempts were made on my life. I know what it feels like to be punched in the face by a man who claims to love you. I know what it's like to be nearly drowned in a bathtub by a man who, by everyone's account, was charming. And after a particularly brutal fight with the last man to harm me, I decided I had finally had enough. I got in my car, which was unregistered. I had no licence, no money in my bank account, no phone in my possession, and with my clothes stuffed into green shopping bags strewn around the car, I just drove to a place where I could sit in safety. When I got there, I looked at my shaking hands and I thought, I need to take my power back. Nothing in my thought process that day was about asking for help. I did not know how to ask for help. I didn't think I was worthy of it, because I knew the safety net of society had frayed beneath me, and maybe it was my own fault. So I made the decision to start selling drugs. Not a moment I'm particularly proud of, but however, for the first time in my life, I felt like I had power. I had freedom and a sense of identity. I was someone who was worth something. And not long after that, I was charged with drug supply, and for the next 2 years, my life would become unrecognisable to the woman that I am today. In early 2017, I got caught in a traffic stop. I was high, but not in the way that I was impaired, in the way that I needed drugs to wake up, like most of us drink coffee. After the positive drug test, they searched my car and found enough to warrant a strip search back at the police station. As I was taken back to the police station, I knew that my life was never going to be the same. When I produced the drugs that I had stuffed down my pants to the female officer, she almost looked sad for me. It wasn't my first interaction with police. I had been in raids, arrested and released before, but it was my first time in a cell in a watch house, and they would keep me all weekend. A watch house is hell on earth. You are given 3 square mats to sleep on that slide apart, exposing your body to the cold concrete slab beneath you. The blanket I was given made me itch just by looking at it, and I was given a shower curtain to put between me and the itchy blanket so that I didn't get lice. And when I was put into the cell, it had no natural light or air, clear walls, and no privacy to use a toilet. There are no showers, no toothbrushes, no TV, and no mental health support. Notably, I had not yet been found guilty of any offence, an important cornerstone to our legal system. I came before the magistrate after 4 days in the watch house on charges of drug supply, drug possession, drug driving, and fraud. The fraud charge was because I had possession of another person's passport. The magistrate, rightly, gave me bail, but to my surprise, and looking back now to my horror, did not mandate me into any treatment program to address the drug addiction I so very clearly had. I was free to go, straight back into the circumstances I was taken from 4 days prior, except now my self-destruct button had been activated because I knew my life would never be the same. I knew I was facing jail time, and any last shred of self-respect that I had disappeared. In that moment I was released from the watch house on bail. I turned left, back into the life I had been living 4 days prior. I often think about punishment and our need for revenge and how this is almost the only reason that prisons currently exist. Some of the men that harmed me had been to prison before, and while I wished for them to be punished for how they had harmed me, the truth remained. Prison did not make them better men. It did not heal the part of me that they broke. It didn't make me safe. It did not make them better. For myself, the cycle in and out of prison and police custody from 2017 until my release in 2019 did not, in fact, change my behaviour. It did not provide me with the resources to change the way I valued my life. It did not change my relationship to community or develop my sense of responsibility to honour our social contract. From the first time I went into a police watch house, the reality is that I became more dangerous to our community. Being released after being charged with drug driving, drug possession and drug supply with no orders to engage in drug rehabilitative services is a failure of the social contract that is supposed to exist between me and the government. The history of the social contract started long before 17th century philosophers gave it a name. First people have practiced relational justice that centred elder-led accountability, care and repair for the almost 65,000 years of history before the First Fleet arrived and imported colonial penal practices. The social contract is the foundation of our modern-day justice system. Governments are entrusted to uphold the fundamental conditions that allow a cohesive way of life for its citizens, and in return, we entrust them to keep order, safety, and give them full control of acting our systems of justice. These fundamentals include housing, food security, education, healthcare and equality. And I would go beyond that and say social belonging and safety, because before colonisation, that is what mob would ensure. When I speak about justice, it is through the lens of a woman who has a complex history. I include conversations about First Nations women, not because I wish to speak for mob, not because I know what it's like to live with the reality of having black skin, and not because I have cultural authority to speak for any nation. I do so with my own complex history of being a First Nations woman, and one I always stop to consider whenever I use my privilege to speak truth. The truth is that because of colonisation, I didn't get to grow up in culture, something I consider to be an incredible loss, not only for myself, but for my nan, my great-grandmother, who was stolen from country and forced to deny any connection to culture for the fear of removal of her own children. While I acknowledge I didn't get to grow up with the incredible wisdom of elders, I make it my personal mission to continue to show up, learn and connect back into what was stolen. And while I speak about the overrepresentation of First Nations women in prison, I do not understand what it is like to be targeted and disbelieved because of the colour of my skin. I do, however, have experiences of injustice and discrimination and to being made feel less than. And I have the capacity to listen deeply to the stories of women who I have spent time in prison with, to listen deeply to community and to learn. And while my own heritage is complex, it is not uncommon. This is the history of this country. It is a story more common than we pay attention to, and it is a history that belongs to us all. If we return to the concept of the social contract, we can begin to understand why our rates of reoffending in this country are so high. Depending on which state we examine and which cohort, reoffending rates remain between 40 and 86%. The ABS says across all prison populations, the recidivism rate remains steady at above 60%. Latest government data suggests that recidivism is rising. And we can see that while we can detain and remove people from our community, albeit at an astronomical cost of $7 billion a year, we cannot provide the right conditions for them to be returned to community and not do further harm. This is because our social contract has fundamentally been broken. Our governments who have been elected to provide safety to us citizens have broken the very contract we entrust them to uphold. Somewhere along the way, safety has been confused with and replaced by punishment. Somehow, our politicians have harnessed social anxiety for safety and turned justice into political theatre and a vote-buying strategy rather than policy that actually keeps us safe. Holding people to account does not have to equal punishment. Safety can only be ensured if we provide opportunity for repair after harm has been caused. Do not be confused. I am not calling for adult prisons to stop existing. Abolitionists believe that prisons should be eliminated in favour of other forms of justice, and which I partly agree with. But prisons have existed in this country for more than 200 years, imported here from England by the First Fleet. In fact, there is nowhere in the world where prisons do not exist in some form. We used to use prisons as places for adults who were committing violence against others, who we deemed to be dangerous. I have shared cells with women whose most serious offence was driving while disqualified. Their imprisonment costs $450 a day, upwards of $150,000 a year per person per year. And that comes out of the taxpayer's pocket. And we also have to consider the social cost that extends beyond the dollar figure that we spend on prisons. It's a colossal waste of money, of potential, of resources, of court capacity. When a woman is released from serving 3 months in prison for a driving offence, she has often lost her job, her housing, her children, and the whole exercise has removed a mother and caregiver from our community. She is then forced into poverty because she cannot drive to her work, she cannot gain new employment because of her conviction history, she will depend on welfare, and she will likely be desensitised to theft as a way of survival. She may even seek out a partner who can provide some form of security while exposing herself to violence. She will then, 60% of the time, return to prison on a more serious charge than driving disqualified. If our social contract were working as it should, this woman would have the opportunity to be held accountable for her actions through education, a reflection of her behaviour, and given the resources to ensure she did not commit further driving offences. a much cheaper, relational and practical way of handling breaches of conduct. As an advocate, I have sat with women who have been charged with stealing food to feed their children, stealing school clothes so their kid could go to school with new school clothes. The social contract is broken here too because it is upon our leaders to ensure basic conditions of existence in our communities, and that includes food and clothing. This capitalist turn that we've taken to the consumption, production and sale of food means that while people struggle to afford the basic needs, big corporations turn billions in profit and food waste has exploded. In prison, I lived and worked with women who had committed serious acts of violence in defence of their own lives. I've worked with women with such severe brain injuries and complex mental health disabilities that they didn't know why they were even in prison, how they got there, when they were going home, or even where they would go. I will never forget the first time I was confronted with the reality that we incarcerate women who have acquired brain injuries from violence committed against them. Women with schizophrenia, FASD, or a combination of the three. Acquired brain injuries are common among women in Australian prisons, with estimates ranging from 33% to 70%, and it's likely due to being in abusive relationships. Acquired brain injuries impact cognitive function, reduce impulse control and decision-making processes. These women need to be in therapeutic environments, supported through care, love, kindness, not in 22-hour lockdowns, isolation, control and food that's neither nutritious nor enough. And while I acknowledge the harm that these women may have caused to individuals or community, we must be able to hold conversations that honour the complexity of these scenarios. The commonality between them is the fact that the social contract was broken and harm was caused to them long before they caused harm. The argument isn't about whether adult prisons should exist, it's about who we send there, the money it costs for us to do this, the social cost that extends beyond that, and how we might find our way back to the centre, rather than this political point scoring at the cost of human lives. No one is ever better off after having contact with our justice system, and it is a failure we should be ashamed of. We fail victims, we fail children, we fail taxpayers, and we fail communities. There are some women who are in prison who may pose a risk to our community, often because their social contract was broken before they even entered the world. Women who cause harm to others do need to be given the proper resources to ensure they don't continue to do harm. But they will never actually get it so long as we have prisons that are full of people who do not need to be there. It doesn't matter if you build more prisons. We will continue to fill them with people who could be managed in the community. Building more prisons is not the answer. It is emptying the ones we have by supporting women to not go or return. It starts by supporting women to stay out of prison, because so often when a mother is removed from her community and incarcerated, her children will follow the same path. Stopping cycles of disadvantage and incarceration starts with supporting women to stay out of our justice system. I was one of the lucky ones. I had somewhere safe to go. I had an education that allowed me to advocate for myself and make sense of a complex landscape. It allowed me to reach for help when I was in prison. When I continued to get knocked back for even the most simple of jobs because of my conviction history, I kept trying because I knew that there was hope. I only knew that there was hope because I had people who loved me. They showed up for me, they drove me places, they paid for a meal, they told me that I could do it. I was also lucky because I haven't spent my entire life in systems. Some women I know have spent their childhood in foster care, their youth in detention centres, their adulthood in prison, until they have reached the point where they think that that is the only life for them, and to cycle in and out of prison is natural and comfortable. When I started Project Herself in 2024, it was because I was frustrated at the lack of representation. Everything I had heard and seen up until my release from prison was that the odds were stacked against me, that people who are ICE addicts rarely ever have little chance of rehabilitation, that women who go to prison almost always go back, and once you have been tainted by your brush with prison, you should keep your expectations for any kind of life low. But what I knew was that women who had been in prison were exceptional at holding space for each other, because I had seen it. Women are able to use their experiences to lift each other up and share learnings. It was peer support in action. So when I started Prokect Herself, I knew the only people who were going to be able to make a real impact were women who had walked the path before. And all of this is only possible because of the women who came before me and paved the way. Women with lived experience are not data centres to be mined for studies without being given real, living wages and power. They should be considered leaders in their own right, with voices, experiences, insights that are valuable. They hold the key to changing the narrative, to changing the way women in prison see themselves, and to truly reducing offending and reoffending. They can contribute to our communities when they are empowered, employed, educated, and embraced. At Prokect Herself, women with conviction histories don't just inform the work that we do. They hold real power. They sit on our board, they lead projects, they support women. They are empowered to make the decisions about their own lives, no matter what that looks like. If we continue down this tough on crime path, expanding facilities, strengthening laws while ignoring the conditions that drive people there, we will continue widening the gap and entrench the very harm we claim to prevent. So I want to finish where I began. Friday night, Brisbane, the watch house door opens and I'm handed a piece of paper with my mugshot on it and the words "released with immediate parole" highlighted in yellow. I am in socks. It's nearly 7:30 p.m. and the city is starting its weekend while I stand there, released, with no plan. No one walks me out, no one asks where I'm going, no one checks whether I have money, a phone, somewhere safe to sleep. I am simply told I am free to go. And in that moment, I'm faced with a choice. I can turn left and jump a train and make my way back to the Gold Coast, back to the people who would welcome me because I was useful, back to the chaos, the drugs, the identity that I had built around survival and self-destruction, the only life that I had ever really known as an adult who was now 29, the life that made me feel enough, that felt familiar. It didn't require me to change, no matter the cost. Or I can turn right and fall into my mother's arms, do the hard work to rebuild myself and my relationships and my world. It did not feel like a heroic moment. There was shame, there was fear, and there was also the overwhelming knowledge that if I chose left, I might never recover. And so I chose right. I'm not exceptional. I did not turn my life around alone. I had somewhere safe to sleep. I had a therapist that worked with me in prison and then showed up for me when I was released. I had parents who, after it all, opened the door. I was loved. I had people who believed I was more than my worst decisions. I had the privilege of stability at the exact moment that I needed it most. Recovery was not a straight line. I was knocked back from jobs because of my conviction history. I had to rebuild trust with my family and with myself. I had to sit in discomfort and take responsibility for the harm that I had caused. But I was able to do that because I was not fighting for survival at the same time. A safe and grounding home life allowed me to create work that now supports other women navigating life after prison. And when I look back at that young woman standing outside the watch house, I do not see someone exceptional. I see someone who had access. And I cannot help but ask, what would it look like if every woman leaving prison had that same access? What if every woman had someone waiting at the gate? What if housing, therapy, employment pathways, community were normal and expected and legislated? Not lucky breaks, but part of our social contract. How many fewer would return to prison? I stand here as living proof that it is possible, that you can be part of repairing our social contract. At the dinner table tonight, have a conversation that holds complexity. Challenge what you believe to be right and true, that holding people to account does not have to equal punishment. If you're an employer, challenge the way you see women with conviction histories. Challenge your processes and policies. Economically empowered women create thriving communities. My deepest hope is that one day every woman walking out of a prison gate will have a right turn available to her, a door that opens, arms that welcome her, a home that grounds her, a system that believes she can return and contribute, because when women are given the chance to come home, they do not just rebuild their own lives. They rebuild families and they rebuild communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tahlia, for what couldn't be a more perfect speech for International Women's Day, and it's a perspective that we don't often hear on such a podium, so well done.
Thank you.
Before we get to questions about, no doubt, the justice system, I would like to ask you your opinion about International Women's Day. Obviously, your speech is a very auspicious event, but some of us have mixed feelings about the day. Do you feel that it is moving the dial forward for women in a meaningful way, or does it sometimes feel a little bit tokenistic? You can be honest.
Yeah, I think part of each of those things, it's definitely important to have a day that recognises the advancement of women and girls across the world. It can be also tokenistic. It can also drive the continued free labour of women in this country and ask us to speak for free or ask us to host events and do all of the heavy lifting. But I think it's a really important day to have these conversations, to drive change and to make meaningful progress.
Thank you. All right, our first question from the media is from Grace Crivellaro from AAP.
Thank you so much for your powerful address. I have a question about specialised drug courts. They exist in Dubbo, in Sydney and in the Hunter, and these courts give drug-dependent offenders wraparound supports like housing, employment support and, more importantly, a rehabilitation program rather than sending these people to jail. Research has shown they reduce repeat offending, but they are only available to people in certain postcodes.
Yes.
Other communities are crying out for this program, and it has been recommended in the Drug Summit report. Some people say that funding them is the issue, but other research shows that keeping people in jail is much more expensive. What would the expansion of such a program mean to you, maybe statewide or nationwide, and why do you think funding things like this is not being prioritised?
Great question. So I think that the concept of drug courts is incredible, and you're right, the research does show that it actually reduces crime because people are getting the support that they need to move away from the harmful behaviours or the antisocial behaviours that they're engaging in before they interact with the courts. It is much cheaper, and it is a much more humane way to actually handle what is a social issue and a health issue rather than a crime issue. I think that you said it yourself, funding is, they are woefully underfunded. So they had the same courts in Victoria, they trialled the same courts in Queensland, then they disbanded them. So, I think that funding them is the proper way to go about it. Why aren't they funded? Potentially because it's not politically attractive, and to harness the fear-mongering that goes on in the community about our safety when crime rates have been tracking down overall for a long time now, is much better for a political party or, political campaign than actually funding things that work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is Shalala Medora from the ABC.
Thank you so much for your speech, Tahlia. You talked in your speech about the political theatre that we're seeing of politicians weaponising fear in the community, and we have seen a lot of states and territories utilise, I suppose, that fear in getting re-elected. I wanted to ask you what, if any, role the federal government has in repairing the broken social contract.
Thanks for your question. We have seen this swing to grab votes through tough on crime policies and harnessing, everyone deserves to feel safe, right? We all want to feel safe in our communities, and by and large, we all are safe. The media also plays a role in this to make sure that we're not sensationalising crime reporting, not just trying to get clicks or likes. But yes, I think that politicians have a role to play here, especially our federal government, when it comes to repairing the social contract, ensuring that big corporations who gouge us at the checkouts, cost of living is a huge, huge crisis at the moment, but also ensuring that people who are coming before the courts have a fair and just trial. And the federal government has absolutely every control over that, the way that, you know, policies swing to the extremes in our country. So thank you. Yeah.
Tahlia, can you talk, we've learned that it's very, very difficult when you walk in your socks out onto the street. Where do you get money from? Were you able to work in prison? Can you tell us a little bit about the economics of life and what you actually have to exist on once those gates open?
Yeah, so women who are exiting prison, everyone who is exiting prison is entitled to a crisis payment from Centrelink. So it's somewhere in the range of $240. So you have to go to Centrelink after you are released from custody to get that crisis payment, and that crisis payment is to last you until you get your first welfare check or find a job. So women who work in prison are often working for as little as $38 a week. They work full-time jobs. Pay is often between $1 and $3 an hour, and they're working for huge corporations that post billions in profit every single year.
What are they doing?
They are repairing headsets, cleaning headsets and repairing them. They are mending bed sheets for government agencies. They work for local government in the community, and they work and don't get paid a fair wage. So we have laws in this country that protect wages and, you know, enforce minimum wages on people in the community. But when women go to prison, anyone goes to prison, but it's International Women's Day, so we'll talk about women. When women go to prison, it is it's ignored. And I can't believe in 2026 I have to stand on this stage and say that that is slave labour. But imagine if women were economically empowered while they were in prison, doing the work that people do in the community, the same job, fair pay. Women would leave prison with money. They would have, like, the ability to actually set themselves up when they get out of prison. Because $240 gets you a shampoo and conditioner and some food, and let's not even talk about how will you pay for a roof over your head in those first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Next question is from Kate Muller from Women in Media.
Hi Tahlia, thank you so much for speaking to us today. For First Nations women leaving the system, and especially the many that you spoke about who have suffered serious injuries because of domestic violence acts committed against them, what does a culturally safe rehabilitation model look like in practice?
It looks like elder-led, and I'm not an elder, so I can't talk to that. There's some incredible elders that do work in the community where I live in Townsville. So they are funded by Justice Reinvestment to deliver elder-led programs, but it looks like allowing them to be self-determined in those practices. And what usually happens is that they are, you know, we strengthen laws and we widen that catchment of First Nations people going into our justice system. So, yeah, I think that the strengthening of laws often ignores the fact that this disproportionately impacts First Nations people, and so we need to hand back the reins to elders in local communities.
Thank you.
Tahlia, I would like to ask you about Aboriginal deaths in custody, which reached their highest rate last year since records have been kept since the 1980s. And the Australian Institute of Criminology recorded 33 of 113 deaths were Indigenous inmates. This means there's been 600 deaths since the Royal Commission into deaths in custody. As a nation, what do these figures say about Australia?
Loaded question. I think that they say that we value one type of life over another in this country, and that it's not taken as a serious matter, that we need to address the overrepresentation of First Nations people in custody in this country.
All right, next question is Hannah Neal from the Canberra Times.
Hi Tahlia.
Hello.
As you said, many women offenders are victims themselves. What changes can be made in court sentencing practices to acknowledge this fact and try to break that cycle?
So we have an issue with violence against women in this country. It's pretty recognised, and amongst people in the community, but not recognised amongst our leaders. And we all deserve to feel safe in our communities. And while the strengthening of domestic violence laws is well-meaning, and this is probably not a popular opinion. They do disproportionately impact women who are often misidentified in those situations, which increases the number of women who are being incarcerated for the misidentification of being perpetrators of domestic violence. So rather than looking at strengthening laws, we need to strengthen relationships and strengthen the way that we respect each other, the way we treat each other, rather than strengthening laws that just disproportionately impact marginalised communities.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Tahlia, there will always be a place for violent people who are a threat to communities. Yes?
Yeah, I mean, look, I and so many other people who have been in prison wish that they didn't exist. However, people who continue to commit acts of violence against other people, people who harm children repeatedly, do need the space and facility to get some kind of behaviour change help, but they will never actually get that help so long as we have this wide catchment of people being, incarcerated and overrepresented in prisons.
And can you just explain what you mean about the misrepresentation or misidentification of women in a domestic violence situation? How do women get tangled up in?
So often when there's a domestic dispute, police will be called. Then what happens is the police will put a cross order on both parties, and then both parties are held legally liable for upholding that cross order, even if the man or the woman is the only one perpetrating the violence. And then what happens is often those couples won't stay apart from each other because there's a piece of paper and they don't quite value that. So then they will get back together, and when the police are recalled again, if there is another dispute, because they haven't actually had the help to get, healthy relationships, the police will then arrest both parties because they're in breach of the cross order. And yeah.
All right, next question is Adrienne Francis from the ABC.
Tahlia, thank you so much for being with us and your address. I'd love to hear more about your work with Prokect herself and how you're working to hold convicted women to account and also help them heal and build agency. More about that work.
Thank you. We have peer workers. Everyone who works with us has lived experience of prison, and we're able to cut through some conversations that we have with women. One of our projects is release planning, so we're able to have really honest conversations with women who are currently incarcerated to help them plan for their release and what that might look like, which gives women a sense of agency and preparation for their eventual release back into our community. We provide other supports as well, like practical supports, but I think what is the most beautiful thing about the work that we do is that we just show up and we know what it's like to be in the exact same position, and the women that we work with know that too. So often it just looks like having a cup of coffee.
And what impact has that had on recidivism with the women that you've worked with since the inception of Prokect herself?
We haven't had any studies done on the work that we do, and we have only been operating since 2024. However, the women that we have supported have been empowered to get jobs because they have somewhere safe to live, because we've supported them into housing. We have women who have stopped offending because they are engaged in therapeutic services. We've had women who were able to buy Christmas presents for their kids because we supported them through that. So I think that while the work we do is important, there's no evidence that we've reduced recidivism.
Here we are ahead of a federal budget. What would be your submission? Where would you like to see the funding directed?
I know there's incredible organisations doing some amazing work, and I think that if we focused more of the budget on supporting community-led, peer-led organisations that work directly with people to keep them out of the justice system, we would actually move the dial on reoffending rates rather than pushing more money into police and prisons.
Thank you, Tahlia.
Thank you.
Tahlia, is there a sense of urgency when a woman is about to be released? Really, you've got a very small window of opportunity to get her to turn right rather than left, because when you have nothing, what are you actually meant to do? What sort of, I mean, are we talking hours a day? How soon do you need to wrap those supports around a woman so that you can keep her safe?
Before she's released.
Yeah.
While she's currently incarcerated. But it does look a little bit like crisis management from time to time. And, you know, we have very low numbers of women that we support because we're a small team. However, yeah, it's like immediately.
So is there not a government program that looks at housing, transport, food?
There is, they work in the sector, so they know. There is some organisations. So women who are in prison, often their sentence is less than 6 months. So we see the cycle actually happening at a much faster rate than what services can actually keep up with. But there is no dedicated service in any state that does all of those supports that you just mentioned, no.
And tell us about the discrimination, because not only are you scrabbling to, you know, to literally find your feet, but you don't walk into a job with a prison record, do you?
No.
You won't have clothes. Do you help? Does your organisation help with clothes and?
Yeah, we work with Suited to Success, who do wardrobe restorations for all the women that we support. So they are delivered to the address they're being released to, if we know what that address is. Yeah. And no, you can't just walk into a job. Having a conviction history is not a protected right under any legislation. So we are discriminated against all of the time for work at every level for our conviction histories.
Do you feel that you still suffer discrimination?
I'm pretty privileged in the position that I have now, but I think I started Prokect Herself because I was actually just so fed up with being knocked back for jobs because of my conviction history that I decided I'd create my own.
And where else does it impact you? You're not...
Yeah, so I don't have a blue card. I'm excluded from working with children, which means that I can't volunteer at my kids' school, my kids' daycare. It's not just me, it's lots of women. I can't travel to certain countries. I had to wait before I was a director of our organisation. So yeah, lots of things.
Yeah. All right, next question is Genevieve Jacobs from Hands Across Canberra.
Tahlia, I just want to start by saying that I believe this must be the first time that an incarcerated woman has ever spoken in this place. So it is so wonderful to hear your voice.
Thank you.
So powerful.
Thank you.
You mentioned the shocking rates of First Nations imprisonment. Here in the ACT, our First Nations population is divided between tertiary educated professionals who are here for government, for university, for IATSIS and the like, and others for whom the outcomes are every bit as bad as they are in the Northern Territory and Western Australia in terms of child removal and imprisonment, from youth detention right through to the AMC. And that's a figure that many people in Canberra find profoundly shocking. Efforts to establish a pilot youth diversion program have not been successful in attracting funding, to the absolute devastation of mob. We are struggling to make any meaningful progress on closing the gap. Why don't people understand the value of culturally appropriate diversion and the terrible consequences of avoiding it?
Yeah, it's pretty sad to hear that those programs are struggling to get funding. By and large, I think it's because there's a lack of representation. There's a lack of visibility, and mob just get in and do the work, right? They don't wait for funding. They just get in and do the work. And so we are expecting mob to behave and interact with a system that doesn't work for them. So that's one barrier. And then we also expect them to report in a way that is sequential or is, you know, white fella's way of doing stuff, rather than just the relational way that they work. So I think there's a twofold conversation to be had there. It's like we need to have the representation, but we also need systems to know. I don't know if anyone's ever done a grant application, but like I know so many aunties that are like, no, I'm not doing that. So, you know, one there. So yeah, it's like we need to make the systems more accessible, but we also need, you know, we need representation in our communities.
Mm.
Yeah.
And as a funder, we're very committed to working really hard to make sure that we make pathways easier for First Nations-led projects.
Incredible.
So thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Our next question is Bhagishri Savyasachi from the Canberra Times.
Hi, Tahlia. Thank you so much for your address today.
Thank you.
You spoke about broken social contracts and widening the gap. In the ACT, Productivity Commission data released last month showed that First Nations people were 25 times more likely to be imprisoned than non-First Nations people, and this had increased since last financial year, and that this was the highest rate in the country. And in the ACT, in Canberra's only adult jail, women also make up about 5% of the prison population. An independent review of Canberra's prison, there were a lot of comments about not enough support or jobs for women, not enough preparation for life in the community. How would you address this this disparity of opportunity when it comes to when you're being released from prison, and how important is having that support, especially since you spoke about how you have had these opportunities that many people might not?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So the ACT, first of all, has a very progressive corrections minister who's an excellent person, and they're working really hard to reduce the number of people, women, who are in prison. So currently the ACT has got 16 women who are in their prison, but it is a prison inside a prison. It is a women's prison inside of a men's prison. And the women don't have access to programs. I have been told they don't have access to the education building, that they are locked down a lot because the men's prison takes precedence over them. So all those conditions exacerbate women's experiences while they're incarcerated, and then obviously robs them of any opportunity to start to look at themselves. 16 women. We can manage those women in the community, I think. You know, there's a lot of money being spent on 16 women to house them in a prison inside a prison, and they don't have housing when they're released. They're often just going straight back into the circumstances they were in before because they don't have a community. But there's only 16 women. I think we could do better.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tahlia, let's get down to brass tacks. You talk about the need to move back to the centre rather than a shift to the right, which is very much tough on crime, and that's where we hear so much of our political rhetoric. How do you get the community on board? So how do you provide proof of concept that people that are painted as, you know, likely to jump out of the bushes and do harm to you, how do you actually show that there is a better way, a more cost-effective way? How do you change, I guess, the political dialogue so that people don't necessarily feel threatened and they're more open to voting for a politician who's not repeating the same old lines? Yeah.
How do you get politicians to stop saying the things they're saying? I don't know. No, in all seriousness, so it is incumbent upon our leaders to not be fear-mongering in our community, to not be spewing hate speech or racist rhetoric. It's incumbent upon our leaders of our country to humanise our experiences and also do things that actually keep us safe. How do we move the dial and how do we show proof of concept? There is proof of concept across the world. Spain has the diagrama model, which is for youth in detention facilities, and they have an excellent rate of lowering recidivism and youth crime. We have the Scandinavian countries who have shown that is possible. There's there's programs across Czech Republic, in Brussels that have proof of concept. So I think we just have to look a little further afield to see that this can actually be done, and we all play a role in that. We all play a role. The media plays a role, like I said before, in not sensationalising things. Our governments play a role in that. But, as everyday people, we also play a role in that. It's about listening and learning and understanding that, and listening to facts. We need to stop listening to the dramatisation of things. It's just listen to the facts. And the facts are that people are overwhelmingly not better off after they've been in prison.
Yeah. Next question is Caitlin Maloney from the ABC.
Hi Tahlia, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you.
There's been much talk over the last few years about cracking down on youth crime. The adult crime, adult time example from Queensland comes to mind. So I was wondering that given the high rates of adult recidivism and the disproportionate amount of First Nations youth that find themselves caught up in the youth justice system, what are your thoughts on our nation's approach to youth crime, and what support could they be doing better to these young people?
It's a big question. While I talk about adult prisons having a place in our country, I want to be very clear. Children's prisons have no place in our country. Our young people do not need to be, they are not that dangerous that they need to be placed in a prison where they are further pushed into being marginalised, pushed into poverty, pushed into removal from country. Children's prisons have no place in our country. Thank you. They need love, they need care, they need support. Children are not capable of understanding consequence, being deterred by consequence. Their brains are not formed. So it's science. I don't know where our leaders get their data from, but in every public consultation that opens, every expert across every field tells them that strengthening youth crime laws is going to hurt children and hurt communities. And I acknowledge people need to feel safe. People do need to feel safe in their community. They need to know that their car's not going to get stolen. I agree. But by putting children in prison does not make them safer. It makes children angry. It disenfranchises them from making any kind of decisions about their life. It also funnels them into adult prisons. And it is a stain on our community that we lock up children as young as 10 years old in this country.
Thank you, Tahlia.
Thanks you. Before our next question from Nick, why did you write? So you've got a book, She Is Me. It's just been published. You're heading from the Press Club to your national book tour. What did you really want it to achieve?
I really wanted women who were in prison to read the stories and know that they could get out and not come back. Yeah.
And for every copy of the book that's purchased by a member of the public,
goes to a woman in prison.
Another copy will go to a woman in prison.
Yeah.
Something to think about. Our next question is from Nick Stewart from Ability News.
Thanks for such a powerful speech. You've reached into our hearts and seriously exposed the terrible trauma that affects this country. Yet we don't do anything about this every time it comes up. You've mentioned also at the beginning of your speech that we have so many different incarceration regimes, different forms of law. Is this a time where we need a Prime Minister like Anthony Albanese to actually stop talking about whether or not he grew up in a disadvantaged background and what he's doing for people who live with disadvantage all around them at the moment? Is this a time for national leadership that can reach across these different boundaries to actually say, look, there is a way to actually resuscitate people, to give people an opportunity that is not being taken at the moment? And sorry, a second, if I may, just on head injury, you talked about the percentage of people with a brain injury who are incarcerated. to what extent there are 7 different brain injury organisations throughout Australia. They look at everyone from car crashes with acquired brain injury through to people with congenital brain injury, represent people with FASD, all the different aspects of brain injury. Is it time again for us to nationally say head injury is something that affects every Australian to some degree or another? This is really something that needs a place on the national stage.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. And I think every time I share that statistic, people are shocked that overwhelmingly women who are in prison have acquired brain injuries. And I don't know about the stats on where they've gotten those injuries from, but if we look at the stats on how many women are in prison who have experienced violence in their lives, and it's over 90%, we could probably draw a conclusion. So yes, I think that we need to be talking about how that actually impacts people's cognitive ability to make decisions, which is directly linked to criminality, right? It's like shoplifting, it's impulse control, it's acting out. So yes, I think that it's time to have a national conversation, and I think you're right. It's time for national leaders, for our Prime Minister, to actually stop talking about him growing up in social housing, because he doesn't live there anymore, and no one can get a house on social housing anymore.
It is a government house.
Oh, sorry, yes. Yes, it is a government house. But I don't think it looks like the social housing that we've got. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. I think we're coming to the end of our questions, but we'll have one more from Grace Crivellara from AAP.
Oh, hello.
Hello again.
Hello again.
Just back to policies like adult time for adult crime that we've heard. As a journalist, I've spent a little bit of time in children's courts and heard the most devastating backgrounds of these kids who are cycling through state care, often are victims of crime themselves, have slipped through cracks by no fault of their own. If you were Prime Minister, what policy would you make and what would you fund to ensure kids are, not slipping through the cracks and ending up through courts?
Oh, wow, if I was Prime Minister, I don't think they'd make me Prime Minister. But, I think we really need to look at the cost of living. I think we need to look at how, this generational marginalisation of certain people in our communities. We need to look at housing as a human right. We also need to look at education as being inclusive and accessible for young people, and we need to keep families together at all costs and lift the rate of Centrelink, because currently people who are on welfare are below the poverty line. So there's lots to be done. If I was Prime Minister, people would not be happy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there is one last question.
Okay.
It's from Shalila from the ABC again.
Hello. Just one to, wrap up. What would you tell your younger self, maybe the younger self who was in the grips of addiction, who had that hopelessness, that powerlessness that you mentioned, from the benefit of hindsight, from where you're standing now?
I would say that this isn't as good as it gets, and that you're worthy, and gonna make me cry. You're worthy, and people love you.
You nearly made it through the whole speech without crying.
Not crying.
Thank you, Shalila. You did it. Well done.
Yay.
It's officially done, and as a token of thank you, you are now officially a Press Club member.
Oh.
So anytime you're in Canberra, you can come back and...
Guys, it's gold.
Thank you